19-00096, the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan of East Kentucky Power. My name is Talina Matthews. I'm Commissioner here at the Public Service Commission, and I will be presiding today. Joining me on video conferencing is Chairman Schmidt. As you know, Vice Chair Chandler, I'll get to where I can say that without stuttering, is recused and will not be participating in today's proceeding. At this time, I would normally caution you to turn your phones off, but due to our current state of emergency, we're hosting this hearing via what I hope is, well, I can't even hope is the last video hearing, but what is now the new normal, our video hearing. Since this is a learning experience still, there are a few suggestions I would offer. In addition to the normal courtesies regarding cell phones, the following may help you prevent clarity and feedback issues. Mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Attorneys, when interjecting, please state your name so that it can be in the record clearly. If you use a phone for audio and a computer for video, turn off the computer audio. Otherwise, we get echoes and feedback. If you're in a room with several people, and it doesn't look like any of you are, only have computer audio on one phone. If another participant is in a nearby office, close the doors because sound carries farther than you think, and that can also cause feedback. You might want to close the doors anyway because, yeah, the microphones are pretty sensitive. Once we're in the GoToMeeting platform, go to your settings. The icon looks like a gear. To ensure the microphone setting is on the microphone you're using, there's a pull-down menu that will list all of the appropriate microphones. Use a wired headphone or wired earbuds for better sound quality. Wired is preferred because wireless devices may lose power depending on the length of the hearing. Keep a charger nearby in case your battery runs low. Alert the Commission if you're experiencing technological failure that prevents your participation at any time. Attorneys, I believe you have staff's cell phone numbers. The hearing today is for the purpose of taking evidence and discussion about the Integrated Resource Plan. At this time, we're going to have the entry of the appearance of counsel. Given the unique challenges of conducting this video hearing, I will also request that each party's counsel identify their witnesses at this time. And we will swear in everyone, correct?
That's correct.
And we'll go ahead and swear in everyone similar to what we do in an FAC case because we recognize that multiple people answered the same question and that there may be a need for that. So for East Kentucky Power.
Good morning, Your Honor. David Samford on behalf of East Kentucky Power Cooperative, Inc. With me as co-counsel is Ms. Allison Hoeniger. I can introduce our witnesses. Let me just go through the list of how they appear here. Mr. Craig Johnson, Mr. Darren Adams, Mr. David Cruz, Mr. Isaac Scott, Mr. Jerry Purvis, Ms. Julie Tucker, Mr. Mark Horn, Mr. Mike McNally, Mr. Scott Drake, and I believe that's it. Did I leave anybody out?
We cannot see Ms. Tucker on our screen. That's fine. For the Attorney General, we'll do all witnesses at the same point. For the Attorney General.
Yes, for the Attorney General, Lawrence Cook, and we have no witnesses.
Okay. For KIUC?
Morning, Your Honor. Mike Kurtz for New Core Steel Galton.
And for Commission staff?
Tina Frederick for Commission staff, Your Honor, and we have no witnesses.
I believe you have John Rognus with you as staff as well.
Yes.
Just in case anybody thinks that we're ignoring John. Public notice has been given, is that correct?
Correct, Your Honor, and proof of publication was filed on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Are there any outstanding motions, Ms. Frederick?
No, Your Honor.
Not Not aware of any.
Okay. I will give the same opportunity for public comment that we always give. Should anyone from the public like to provide the commission with public comment, instructions to call in are located on our website, psc.ky.gov. The phone lines will remain open for several minutes at the start of the hearing and close if there are no callers or after everyone has had an opportunity to speak. Should you call in, please state your name and address for the record before making your statement, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. If there's more than one caller, please be respectful and allow one person to make a statement at a time. It should be noted that comments may always be submitted on the PSC's website at psc.ky.gov. Give a few seconds to see if there's anyone on the phone.
Good morning. Is there anyone on the line? No callers at this time.
Okay, I don't believe there's anyone on the line. If someone calls in the next few minutes, we'll interrupt what we're doing and go back. Okay, we plan to swear in all of the witnesses all of the Ekpc witnesses at the same time. Given the nature of the issues, we recognize that multiple witnesses will have answers to different pieces of the staff's questions, rather than having the endless deferring to another and, one person who ends up at the end who has to answer everything. We'll make this a little more level. So, Mr. Sanford, which order? Well, I guess we've introduced them. Everyone can raise your right hand. I think I see. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct under penalty of perjury?
I do.
I do.
Well, thank you. Now, probably because we didn't do an introduction that included their titles, it might be meaningful, Mr. Sanford, for you to introduce everyone, or have everyone introduce themselves now according to title.
Sure.
And what they do with the company.
Do you want me to qualify each witness as well, or forego that formality?
I think we can probably qualify all of them at the same time. How's that? After
Okay,
you've
that will be
introduced
fine. Mr. Johnson, would you just state your name and title, please?
Greg Johnson, I'm Senior Vice President of Power Production.
Mr. Adams?
Aaron Adams, I'm Director of Transmission Planning and Protection.
Mr. Cruz?
David Cruz, Senior Vice President of Power Supply.
Mr. Scott?
Isaac Scott, I'm the pricing manager.
Mr. Purvis?
I'm Jerry Purvis, Vice President of Environmental Affairs.
Ms. Tucker?
Julia Tucker, Director of Power Supply Planning.
Mr. Horn?
Mark Horn, Manager of Fuel and Emissions.
Mr. McNally?
Good morning. I'm Mike McNally, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer.
And Mr. Drake?
Scott Drake, Manager of Corporate Technical Services.
If you want to qualify them as a group.
Sure, that would be fine. Did each of you cause certain responses to data requests to be filed in the record of this proceeding, or have a role in the drafting of the IRP filing?
I did.
I did, yes.
And if we were to ask those same questions that were posed in the data request, would your answers be the same?
Yes. Yes, they would.
Does anybody have any corrections, changes, edits to that those responses to data requests?
No.
No.
Your Honor, I tender the witness for cross-examination.
Ms. Frederick.
Thank you. We're going to begin this morning with just a series of questions based on responses to questions in the data requests and also the demand side management portion of the IRP. And our first question is just basically about reaching a saturation point with any particular demand side management program. There are only so many homes that can be audited and buttoned up, and only so many demand control switches that can be installed. What, if any, current demand-side management programs has EKPC identified as having reached or nearly reached a saturation point?
This is Scott Drake. I think the only program that possibly has reached somewhat of a saturation point would be the direct load control switches. Traditionally, across the United States, there is a saturation point of number of customers or members in our case that are willing to participate in that program and allow the utility to manage their air conditioner or water heater during low times. And we put in a large number of switches, about 37,000 switches that are out there. But as we were trying to grow the program and advertising for the program, we started to see a steep decline in new participants. So right now we're starting to think that we're probably at a saturation point unless we were to significantly change that switch program, just due to the fact that we're not getting any response now to our promotion of the program. So that's the only program that I think that we have noted at our potential saturation point. And because of that, as we were looking at other utilities across the nation that had similar programs, if you recall in the last DSM program changes that asked for approval and received approval from the commission, we added thermostats. We're starting to see utilities across the nation switch, if you will, for lack of a better term, from installing switches to thermostats. And by doing that, we're actually tapping into a different segment of the population that's willing to participate in that program.
Thank you. On that note, I would just like to follow up with what are the percentage of customers that have participated with installing demand control switches?
I would have to check that number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I would say it's probably somewhere in the range for 5 to 10%, in that range.
Okay. And you mentioned shifting over into the thermostat demand control switch. What, if any, other innovative programs are on the horizon on the demand side management?
Yeah, we're looking at some other potential opportunities with demand side management. One of the things that we are investigating and talking to a lot of companies across the nation is potential use of batteries for demand side management. If a homeowner allow us to utilize a battery in a similar manner that we do for the switches during peak time, we're investigating that. We're investigating some other applications that are still thermostat based, where the main, the main usage during peak time is usually air conditioning in the summer, and affecting the utility, and managing the air conditioner seems to be, where we would like to be to get the biggest bang for our buck in these programs. And we're also looking at some other thermostat types of programs.
Okay. And in the battery program that you were discussing, who would own that battery?
The homeowner would own it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Identify and describe what EM and V quality assurance efforts are being made by EKPC with respect to its member cooperatives.
On the EM and V, what we do with EM and V is on the direct load control program, the switch and thermostat program, we have a robust EM and V process where we do install special meters on a small sampling of participating homes so that we can measure the exact usage of the air conditioner. And there's also some additional homes that have what we call hobo meters installed, which are installed outside at the air conditioner compressor that only collects one time of the compressor. And we hire a third party to collect that data for us over the year. We've done this for 10 years, and that company does an analysis to determine exactly how much kW has dropped, per degree of temperature, whether it's 95 degrees outside or 98 degrees outside when we're managing switches. So we have a robust program for that. On the energy efficiency side, due to the cost of implementing a stringent EM&V program, we've relied more on utilizing the technical resource manuals from other states like Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. Those technical resource manuals are very detailed in the calculation of expected kilowatt hour saved when a measure, like putting insulation in the attic, for example, or a program like a Energy Star appliance program. We have looking at those, and they've done EM&Vs, looking at those TRMs. We have a really good understanding about how much savings we have without the significant investment in doing a robust EM&V program on the back end after participation.
Thank you. I have a question or two about the Cooperative 2.0. Has Ekpc filed a report or copies of the meeting minutes with the commission?
I think in one of the data responses we filed the last meeting, the agenda, and some information about what was discussed at those meetings. I think that was with one of the data responses, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, the agendas were filed, but meeting minutes weren't. That's why I asked. And can you?
I'm not sure that we had the meeting minutes on some of those, to be frank.
Okay. Can you just give us a verbal update on the Cooperative 2.0 since the IRP was filed?
We've met with them one time, I believe, that may not be in the record so far, since the IRP was filed, or right before the IRP was filed, to discuss the changes to the DSM programs, both the energy efficiency and direct load control program. We had a meeting at East Kentucky Power, invited all of the collaborative participants. A portion showed up that attended, and we did have a robust discussion with them about the changes that we were having to do, elimination of several programs, if you recall, due to the fact that they were not cost effective anymore. That was the last meeting that I recall that we've had with Collaborative 2.0.
Are there any plans for that group to meet in the future?
David, would you like to address that one?
I'll be happy. Our collaborative, as a result of when we were at the legislature with promoting change in the net metering law, our colleagues from the collaborative decided that they didn't care to meet with us anymore. So we haven't. That's hurt the relationship with the public interest groups, and we haven't they haven't had an interest in meeting with us anymore.
Thank you for that. I'd like to switch gears here now and move to supply side optimization and modeling, if we may. Can you explain the interaction between the production cost model and the resource optimizer?
Julia Tucker responding. It is the same model. It has different modes, if you will. So part one of the options is to have a resource optimizer, and in that we give it all the options that were listed. For new resources, it is also calculating production costs at that time, and it's trying to minimize the cost of the system while looking at new resources to serve them.
Can you explain what the production cost model does and what is the output of the model?
The production cost model is, again, it's the same model. You turn the optimizer on or off. When you're looking at just the production cost, then we're giving it market information, market prices to compare to dispatch our units against. It will economically dispatch those units, we give it our load that we expect to serve, and then it'll tell us based on how the market prices and our units are running, what we expect to pay to serve that load market.
Does the model run all resource options simultaneously and then stack them according to least cost or net present value least cost?
In the optimizer,
Yes.
okay, yes, it's net present value, least cost.
Net present value least cost. Thank you. There appears to be a choice when running the production cost model to run it either deterministically, where the results are assumed to be accurate, or more stochastically, where there is some probability that the results will be accurate. Explain which method EKPC used for this IRP.
Okay. That's right. The deterministic is you give it one path to go down. So you give it one load forecast, one price forecast for the market, price forecast for fuels. Everything is based on one expected line. Stochastically, we give it the expected values, then we also give it a high and low bounds, and we give it a probability curve for each of those of how they would run, and we let the model then choose which path it's on, and it'll based on the probability, it will go down it'll vary between that high and low values. We run 500 iterations in that model, in the stochastic model, and the idea is that you've picked up all the different scenarios that could happen, and you're coming out with what you would expect the average of all of those to be.
How are you choosing the probabilities for the inputs?
The forecast is based on weather probability, and there's a discussion of it. I can find the page for you if you'd like, of where the probability of the weather being what we've observed as normal, what the extremes have been for the high and low, and we've got a 90 and a 10 going either way, 10% either bound on the load. The pricing we base on history and how far it has, what we've seen the magnitude of changes there.
Okay. For my next couple of questions, I'm going to be referring to Table 319 and also Table 8.6 and comparing those.
Table, I'm sorry, 319 and 8.6. Okay.
Let me know when you have those. I don't want to continue till you can see them.
I have them.
Thank you. Now,
Okay.
it appears that the projected peaks that are used in the optimization model in Table 8.6 deviate from the demand side base case peak forecasted loads in Table 319. And that deviation begins in the year 2024. Can you explain to us what is happening starting in 2024 to explain the deviation between the two tables?
The base load forecast has the DSM in it is the existing programs as we have today, with no new growth in them. In the goal forward, we've added additional DSM programs in based on the analysis, and the were reduced based on new programs being added into the system.
I'm sorry, Ms.
We
Tucker.
also, on Table 8.6, yes.
Ms. Tucker appears to be breaking up just a little bit here in the hearing room.
Okay. Can you hear me now, or?
I can.
Okay. Table 8.6, the load has been impacted by any and all new DSM programs that were in the IRP that were developed through the IRP. The load forecast on table 319 only assumes the programs that were in place at the time that the forecast was developed. So the table on 8.6 on page 142 has any new DSM programs that we've added into it, as well as the interruptible loads that can be interrupted on peak have been taken out of these peak loads, so we're not planning capacity for interruptibles or for new DSM programs.
So why is that not done on the demand side?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The peaks are modified on the demand side for the capacity expansion. The load forecast is load that we expect to have based on existing programs, but we don't put the new programs and growth in there, so that if those programs don't come to fruition, or we don't grow those programs as expected, we've not modified the load forecast for those at that point.
So can you just explain why you would not want to have consistent assumptions across the demand side, sensitivity assumptions, and the supply side modeling?
I'm cut out, I think. I didn't hear the question.
The upper and lower bounds that are in the demand side modeling, why would you not also want to have that same assumption in the supply side modeling?
We have the demand side higher and lower within the capacity modeling portion of it. The table on 319 is what we expect our load to be, given what we know today and what growth we expect in customers and those clients, but it does not include new DSM programs or new growth in those DSM programs. You want to be able to measure the value of what those programs are worth going into the future. So if we modified the base forecast, you wouldn't be able to, your analysis on the DSM side altered immediately because you wouldn't see the impact, if that makes sense. Table 319 as well is used in an RUS filing that we make that's required, as it's not based on the capacity plan, but I'm not sure I've answered your question yet.
Thank you. I think that gets us there. This question is about
Okay.
forecasted prices and costs, such as market prices, natural gas prices, coal prices, and emission costs. Is there only one forecasted set of prices and costs correlated into the load data?
There is an expected price. Yes, there's one set of prices that are in the load data, and then we put a probability curve, how high and how low they can go.
What are the emissions that are covered in the emissions cost data?
We model price for SO2 and NOx at this time. We have emission allowances for both of those particulates at this time, and that's what is in the pricing of in the production cost pricing.
Is carbon included?
No, we're not. We do not currently include the price for carbon.
Okay. Explain how EKPC models future changes in environmental requirements for coal plants.
Okay, in the IRP, we based the future additions based on what we knew of the rules and laws at that time. And I can let Mr. Purvis jump in here at any time, but as far as the modeling, the CCR and ELG rules were modeled. They did not impact the output or the operations of our plants. It was modeled in the form of new equipment and in the financial impacts of that were in the section and in the financial modeling.
And how are the uncertainties that are surrounding environmental requirements modeled?
We did not specifically model any new environmental rules in the IRP.
And what about uncertainty related to load? How would that be modeled?
That would be in the high and low load probabilities and the around the base case.
And how is market price uncertainty modeled?
We have a base price expectation, and then we put a probability curve around those.
Okay. And how is fuel price uncertainty modeled?
It's the same. We have a base fuel expectation, and then we develop a probability curve around that.
Okay. Now, for the next few questions, I'm going to be referring to Table 8.2 in the.
May
Yes.
I, before we move, can I ask about the environmental?
Absolutely.
Sure.
You put you look at the probabilities and the uncertainty with regard to fuel costs, with regard to weather, with regard to market prices. If I'm thinking back the last 15 years in this industry, I think the thing that has been most likely to change have been those environmental rules and the costs that are associated with those. So do you think your modeling would be different if you did include some uncertainty or probabilities around those environmental rules?
Well, Julie, you want me to step in and help some? Okay.
Please.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioner Matthews and all.
Good morning.
As you all know,
Will you state your name so that our...
yes, Jerry Purvis, Vice President of Environmental Affairs. Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Since you're not in the room, she can't see who's talking, so.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So, East Kentucky, as you all know, began a very proactive culture in January of 2008. as a result of a couple consent decrees. And essentially, we had learned that in the past that we had not done a good job of surveying the environmental waterfront, working closely with our state regulators, working closely with our national regulators, ECA and so forth. So those issues began to change in January of 2008. And so what we do is to keep track and monitor all of the rules that are in draft, proposed, go final, and then after they go final, there's a tremendous amount of litigation which our legal bench looks at and keeps us informed. And so just as we have provided the PSC, and I can refer to Section 9 for those that would like to take a look, there's a fairly robust section of nearly 43 pages of the environmental waterfront to capture it in the best light we can. Items such as CSAPR, which that came on the scene early in 2000 and coming forward, mercury air toxic standards, coal combustion residuals in 2010 after Kingston's spill on December 22nd in 2008. The effluent limitation guidelines 316A, NACS, that's updated every 5 years by EPA. Cross-state air pollution rule, I think we're now in our third round since 2014 when it went final, and we had to comply with that. But the clean plan, it's 3,000 and some pages in a model rule, and then working with the state on those fronts. And what we do is we explore the legal ramifications, the environmental impacts to the assets of East Kentucky. WOTUS, I mean, I've counted there's over 23 rules in the past decade. Normally we would get 2 rules in 10 years. And what we do is we develop internal discussion, and then we work with Burns and Mac and Stanley Consultants and so forth to price any impacts from the environmental rules and provide that to Julie's team, as well as the NOx and SOx and performance of our environmental compliance plan under CSAPR. And so she has those inputs for EPA, CSAPR, SOx, NOx, and ozone season. She has those costs for the capital costs that we provided. The AG, I believe, and I'll have to look, it may have been AG 40 and AG 10 when they asked for our capital costs. Yes, here they are. So any impacts within, I would say, a 5-year waterfront is what we can predict as best as possible with certainty, and changes to the assets, and we provide those for price through engineering, and then those identified impacts are part of the planning process. So that's a little bit about the last 12 years and the next 5 years as we continue to keep up with what's going on in the environmental waterfront regime, working with our state regulators, one of which is the Public Service Commission. Does this help answer the question as to the certainties we can identify in the environmental regime and the uncertainties that we can speak to? Does this help?
I think I was not so much thinking about the things you just said, but as the large uncertainties in environmental rules as you're looking at a 15-year look forward, and how are those captured in the same way that a fuel cost uncertainty or a market price uncertainty or a weather uncertainty is captured in the modeling. I get that. I was trying to figure out more, I guess, why aren't environmental uncertainties modeled in in a similar fashion to those other uncertainties when you're looking at a 15-year. And, you know, what I didn't hear you say, anything to do with greenhouse gases, whether you want to assume those probabilities are 0 or those probabilities are 100, I'm going to think that they are relevant to a model going forward. We may know more about that in November, but certainly I think in the next IRP, maybe a discussion of the modeling over that 15-year time horizon for environmental uncertainties, because they all have impact on your production costs. They may have impact for your fuel cost, you know. So that was just, you know, I'm taking the liberty of being the only one up here on the bench and asking questions. So I will give it back to staff.
Thank you.
To the extent that pricing is impacted, then we haven't defined what drives that pricing impact. There could inherently be environmental reasons that are driving the market price or the fuel prices to go various ways. Did we specifically say this environmental rule will drive this price to this method? No. But
Okay.
we looked at the pricing around it in an effort to capture all the various scenarios that could drive pricing different ways.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Matthews, this is David Cruz, Senior Vice President of Power Supply. I agree with Julie that while there's not a specific, we don't specifically have a environmental uncertainty in it, I do believe that the forward price curve for power includes some uncertainties associated with in the forward energy price. I think it's captured, maybe not to your satisfaction, but it is captured there.
It's not to my satisfaction, it's just my curiosity, right? Again, I get to be the only one up here in a case that the commissioners don't make a decision in. So I can ask, I have a little more free reign to ask questions.
And I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
And you're welcome. So.
If I might follow up on that.
I assure you it's easier to ask the questions than it is to answer them.
Do you let the model choose the probability distribution around the variable? Is that something that the model determines?
No, the probability distribution is an input into the model. Those have to be correlated. Obviously, you don't want a high market price with low gas, pricing at the same time. That wouldn't follow. So they have to be correlated together to make sure that as it draws various assumptions, it's drawing that information in the correct relativity together.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. And just as a matter of housekeeping, we do have someone who's trying to produce documents on the screen for us. Ms. Goodrich, she experienced some technical difficulties earlier when we were talking about Table 319 and Table 8.6, but I've received a message that she is now able to produce those documents on the screen. Just letting you know that, so if you have a table or something that pops up, that's because she's putting that there on the screen for us. I have a couple of questions that surround Table 8.2. So, Ms. Goodrich, if we could see Table 8.2.
And Ms. Frederick, if I could, just to remind everybody that the redacted portion there is confidential information.
Correct. We're showing all the redacted, we're showing the redacted version of this table. On this table, there are 2 wind options that are listed. Can you explain the differences in these options?
They are the same option. We limited it to 100 megawatts for each. And in case the model wanted more than 100 megawatts at any one time, we gave it an extra option there that it could pick up, but it was just to be able to get more than 100 at a time in there.
Okay.
And same with power purchases, correct?
Correct.
That's just the ability to not just take 100 megawatts.
Correct.
Can you explain the process and the basis EKPC used to select the resources that are listed in the table?
Yes, ma'am. The first two resources are traditional generation of both gas-fired generators. The first one is a peaking unit, a combustion turbine. The second would be a combined cycle that could be used in peaking and or intermediate needs. That we felt like covered the realm of traditional resources that would be considered going into the future. And we looked at the renewable options, just a generic solar and a generic wind projects. And got that information from the National Renewable Energy Labs, so that we're dealing with current and not just local data. And then the power purchase agreement, we are a winter peaking system. Our winter peak is substantially larger than our summer peak. Summer, the PJM market that we operate within is a summer peaking system, so prices are generally higher in the summer than they are in the winter. So we can take advantage of covering that higher winter load at a lower price by looking at just a seasonal purchase as opposed to a year-round purchase, and that was the intent there.
How is the uncertainty of future market conditions introduced into the model?
Through the market pricing.
And does the model contain an option to retire an existing unit?
No, we do not. We did not let the model just retire the unit. And the reason we don't do that, or have not done that yet, the model doesn't have a full financial set of information in it. So when you look at retiring a unit, if there is value still left on the books, we have a stranded asset still sitting there that we have to figure out how to handle, and the model doesn't recognize that and doesn't have a way of valuing that at this time.
And explain whether the production cost model distinguishes between purchasing resources, retiring resources, and building resources.
The production cost model, or the expansion model, just looks at total cost to serve the system. So it's looking at our resources that we have available and looking at the market and the amount of load that we need to serve. And it's looking at all the various combinations of the least cost to serve that. If the existing units became, or the market price was such that it was better to bring on a new resource to serve that energy, then it would do so.
Are the seasonal PPAs in Table 8.2 the only market transactions that were included in the optimizer as resource options?
They were only ones considered as resource option. As energy options, it always has the market. It can utilize the market as much as it wants in the energy to serve energy on a daily basis.
And explain the basis for the seasonal PPAs being the only market transaction included. Were they selected because they were the least cost option?
they were selected for the need to cover the winter peak season. We don't have a need to buy capacity via a power purchase agreement for the summer seasons. We're long, and so it didn't seem on the front end that it would make sense to put a year-round purchase in there. The larger expense of an annual purchase is in the summer, and that's not the time that we necessarily needed it. So in an attempt to minimize costs, we look at just covering the winter season with a PPA.
Okay. Can you explain how EKPC plans for extreme events that are not weather-related, something like COVID-19 or a recession?
From the power supply planning standpoint, or from our business standpoint?
Business.
I'll take that then. This is Mike McNally, Chief Financial Officer. We have and exercise regularly crisis management plans and other long-range planning that we do to try to understand the impacts of scenarios of events. We have a pandemic plan, for example, that was developed quite some time ago and updated periodically. And we dusted that off at the beginning of this year when we saw what was happening in Asia and began updating it for the specific circumstances and then implementing it pretty quickly after that. Our planning for those types of events, I would say, is really pretty independent of an IRP type of an analysis, because those are extreme tail events, if you will, and they don't really fall into the spectrum of considerations for an IRP.
Thank you. Can you explain how EKPC models transmission constraints and whether they are captured in the production cost model or the resource optimizer?
Julie Tucker responding. The transmission constraints are not specifically modeled in the production cost model. We pick them up as we're looking at specific constraints. We would pick them up through pricing. So in the market, we have an LMP, locational marginal pricing for each node, and that price is made up of the energy cost, the congestion cost, and the losses. Energy is the same at any node within the PJM system. What drives the difference in pricing is congestion, and congestion is driven by many times transmission constraints. And so the pricing is where we pick up the congestion component on the transmission system.
So that would be inherent in the forward curve?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions on forecasting. EKPC's next IRP is scheduled for April 2022. When will the demand and supply side forecasting be constructed for that IRP?
We are currently updating our we update our load forecast every 2 years. We are in the development phase of our formal update at this time, and by the end of the year, we'll have a new load forecast. So that'll be the 2020 load forecast, and that is the forecast I would expect to be used to be filed in April of 2022. We would not have, the next forecast after that would be at the end of 2022. So it would not be there in time for that IRP filing.
Okay. So the data that will be used, the forecast data that will be used in the 2022 IRP will be roughly 2 years old when that is filed.
Unless we have substantial reason to update that in the interim. We could do an update if there's specific reasons to do so. But currently we would expect to have the formal update in 2020 and utilize that data.
So you will
Just if I may, the IRP is typically filed in March or April, so it would be more like
It's due
50,
in April.
60 consultants. Correct.
Correct, but the analytical work will start in the summer of 2021.
Right.
And so the information at the time that the analytics start being developed will only be 6 months on.
And,
By the time it actually gets filed, yes, there's several more months on it.
and we're going to hope that 2020 is not a great representative year of anything. So you can put some footnotes and some asterisks on that data. That will be fine.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Ms. Frederick. Back to the resource modeling and your options. When you're modeling intermittent resources in your IRP modeling, did you use effective load carrying capability values to determine the capacity contribution of wind and solar, or some other methodology?
We utilize the effective capacity.
As is currently done in PJM, are you inherently adopting the rules, the status quo that's in PJM? For what
Yes, ma'am.
they consider the effective capacity of the resources?
Yes, ma'am.
So when they update that, if they do update that, the next IRP or modeling might be different?
Yes, that's fair.
I'm finished for now.
Okay. We're going to go back to table 8.2, please. I just need to ask a clarifying question. The column labeled capacity, is that effective capacity?
That would be installed capacity.
That's installed capacity.
Correct.
Okay. I have a question on EPA compliance. Are there any major changes in EPA's 2019 report? And if so, what impact would that have on Ekpc?
This is Jerry Purr, Vice President of Environmental Affairs. And so, there's always what I call a lot of bouncing of the rules, right? So post 2019, we have seen a few changes from EPA, specifically in new source review and guidance, 3 different times. December the 3rd, 2019, since you referenced 2019, and ambient air guidance. Essentially, EPA is, because of the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, they are re-looking at their policy and issuing guidance on NSR, new source review. So in the old program of new source review, the industry, quite honestly, had been afraid of, and given the fact that we have one in 2007 ourselves, a consent decree, the industry had been very afraid to make any efficiency improvements. And so one of the biggest hurdles for ACE going forward, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, was to revisit new source review and draw a bright line to hourly maximum emissions, as opposed to doing look-backs that hindered efficiency improvements. And so every time you run the calculation for the old new source review, it puts the utility in a catch-22 of whether or not to improve efficiency and put ourselves at risk of getting a consent decree, or to do the project at all. And so EPA is still working on that. Their next change was March 25th of 2020, and then just last couple weeks, August the 5th, trying to revisit new source review, draw a bright line to hourly maximum emissions to give the Affordable Clean Energy Rule a chance to improve efficiency of coal units, which would mean making the same megawatts with less carbon dioxide. So that's one of the changes, and it's all in guidance. It's not a reg, it's not a rule, it's not something that's quantifiable just yet, but it is a very key for the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. The next thing, obviously, is as stakeholders in our industry are moving forward to develop compliance plans for the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, we just met with the state last week. The utilities are moving forward with their approach of how to comply with ACE. They're working very closely with the Division of Air Quality and the Cabinet to develop those emission baselines, the approach to the 7 candidate technologies and how we evaluate those, one of which we've asked John Lyons, which I understand is may be being promoted, but we've asked him what is the value that the state would like for us to put on carbon. The previous administration put $0 on carbon in our evaluations, and we wanted to make sure, since the administration had changed, whether or not to add any value to carbon in these evaluations for heat rate improvements on individual units. The rest of it would be looking at EPA's control costs and a typical engineering cost for the 7 candidate technologies. And then we approached the division with a plan of how best to comply. So we're very intimate in working with the Division of Air Quality and the Cabinet in regards to EPA's Affordable Clean Energy Rule. And as you guys know, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule requires the state, through federalism, to develop the performance standards for carbon dioxide for each and every state. So as opposed to the Clean Power Plan, which dictated a emission reduction and target, the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, through cooperative federalism, works with the states. The states have to develop that performance standard and how best to comply with the rule. And so we're working very intimately with them, and that was actually Monday. Post 2019, in addition to that, we are keeping a close eye on the CCR federal permit program. As you all may very well be aware, there are only 2 states, Georgia and Oklahoma, that have a federal and state permit program for CCR. We're very happy to see EPA put forth a federal program so that the other 46 or others may be able to adopt it as a state program. And so we're keeping it up. The comments just closed August the 7th of 2020. CCR Holistic Part A is now reached a finality July 29th of 2020. It is essential to revise the closure date for surface impoundments to April the 11th, 2021. It also changed the whether or not we can seek alternative closure, and we can. That's good news, and we will. We plan to work with the Division of Waste Management and the Public Service Commission as we roll forward on that rule. Holistic Part B, EPA is still working on that one. It is not final, it's proposed, but it is the alternative demonstration for unlined surface impoundment and pending closure. But I'm happy to report that after they put it in the Federal Register of March of 2020, all 3 of these CCR rules have very little to no impact to East Kentucky's original compliance plan that was filed in 2018. So then we've also seen changes in WOTUS, January of 23rd of this year, where the EPA and the Army agreed to deliver under President Trump's promise for navigable waters, and it essentially balances the national and federal protection of our streams, nation's waters, and states' autonomy over aquatic resources. Essentially, and for Kentucky, it eliminates the cost for the ephemeral streams, commonly known as dry ditches. So for any future projects that we would undertake, whether in landfills or transmission right-of-ways, it appears that the definition has switched back to the Scalia definition of defining navigable waters and removing the overreach of the federal government to non-navigable waters, and will lower our costs. So that's WOTUS, and that's all of these things, if they'll stand up in the courts. And of course, we have the Administrative Procedures Act that for monitoring anything past April of 2020 could be subject to change by the next administration should a different administration get elected in November. And then, of course, the MATS reconsideration of May 22nd, 2020, basically EPA's position to regulate the mercury air toxics under Section 112, that it corrects some errors in the 2016 finding. However, the EPA also reaffirmed that no more emission reductions of HAPs under the consideration of residual risk was required at this time, which means that there's no impacts to scrubbing equipment or further mercury reductions. So I know that's a long list, but I wanted to make sure that Ekpc demonstrated that we never fall asleep at the wheel on the EPA waterfronts. As I mentioned earlier, we found religion in 2007 with a couple consent decree. And just to recap, NSR, CCR, ELG is still. WOTUS has had some material changes that actually help us. MATS was reconsidered, no additional control equipment. Ozone last week, I believe it was August the 14th, was reaffirmed at 70 parts per billion is where it is. So I don't see any changes there at this time. CSAPR has been remanded, but I'm happy to report that DAQ did an excellent job working with EPA, getting the Kentucky CSAPR SIP approved for annual SOx and NOx allowances. The state has an approved SIP, and we're tickled to death. It's one of 22 states. So what a hats off to DAQ on that. There's some wiggle and other areas and uncertainties that are hanging out there always. We're trying to keep our ears and eyes to the ground as to what those mean to East Kentucky. Is there an impact to our environmental compliance plan that's approved by the PSC? And if it is, then we will be the first to work with our state agencies, EPA, identify them, price them out, and get in front of the PSC as soon as possible. And are there any questions from potentially anything I may have missed?
No, Mr. Purvis, thank you very much for that thorough update. We really appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
This time I'm going to let Ms. Goodrich know that she can remove that table 8-2. And we're going to turn our attention briefly to the comments made by the Southern Renewable Energy Association. SREA has recommended that EKPC move away from capacity-focused resource planning. What other types of planning are utilized in resource planning?
I think we're having trouble hearing Ms. Tucker.
I see her mouth moving, but I don't hear anything.
Julie Tucker responding. We have an obligation as a participant in the balancing authority to develop a given amount of, or to either show up with or purchase a given amount of capacity to cover our requirements within the PJM system. So we cannot completely get away from capacity planning, I don't believe, as from a reliability standpoint. We can develop various energy plans that can meet part of what the Southern Renewable Group is saying, but we can't completely get away from capacity planning in today's reliability requirements and in our obligation to serve our members.
Is EKPC aware of any regulated utility that utilizes any of the other types of planning besides capacity-focused resource planning?
I am not aware of any other regulated utility.
Thank you. SREA recommended that EKPC use levelized cost of energy benchmarks. What is EKPC's response to that, and should they be used as inputs into capacity planning?
Julie Tucker responding, the levelized cost of energy is how we modeled the solar and the wind projects. And so I believe we've met their recommendation on that one.
Does EKPC consider tax credits in resource planning?
East Kentucky is a non-taxable entity, and as such, we're not able to effectively take advantage of the tax incentives. The way that we are able to take advantage of tax incentives is via power purchases, purchasing from a facility that was able to take advantage of the tax credits. When, at the time we built the solar Cooperative 1 project that is located here at the East Kentucky headquarters, there was plenty of renewable energy bonds financing available that allowed us to take a similar financial incentive and advantage to being able to construct that project. My understanding is those bonds are no longer available, so we don't have a direct route of being able to take advantage of the tax incentives.
Thanks. Explain whether renewable energy credits are integrated into the pricing of renewable resources for modeling inputs.
Yes, we look at how it's a REC, a renewable energy credit, is developed for each megawatt hour of generation from a renewable resource, and that REC has a value to it, and we do look at the value of that in the modeling.
Given, this is just a general question, given that the 2019 IRP used 2017 data, and we're now in the year 2020, was the 1.4% overall growth in load forecast realized?
On a weather normalized basis, we're very close to the load forecast. Weather was not what we considered normal in 2018 and 2019. So we did not hit as was, but if you normalize the weather, we're very close to what the forecast was stating.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Mr. Cook?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I do have some questions. I'm going to start off, I believe, with Ms. Tucker. Could you turn to your response to the Attorney General's second data request, item number 1? Just let me know when you're ready.
I have it.
Okay, thank you very much. And the question here asked for the member owners' actual sales to coal mining customers for the most recent year. And I understand your response that EKPC does not track that data. But I guess my question is, are you also saying that the members do not track sales to large customers?
They track sales by customer class. And so the
Class, is that correct?
would be part of a class, but it wouldn't be specifically just the mines only.
Okay. So you know that,
They have RUS account that they
I'm sorry, I think you're breaking it. So I guess I was just trying to understand, do you know for a fact that the members do not keep track of this data?
No, I do not know for a fact. I can verify that.
Okay, I think I will ask a post-hearing data request then to verify that. And then while I have you here, let's see, if you could turn to your response to AG 2-3 and just let me know when you're there.
Okay?
Okay. Can you read your response into the record?
EKPC's modeling is based on detailed production cost modeling, not screening models. The referenced modeling for renewable and fossil generation comparisons is for a generalized screening level comparison. EKPC's modeling is much more detailed than either of the methodologies in the referenced report. EKPC does not use either approach referenced in the EIA report. EKPC models each specific resource, both renewable and fossil resources, and compares the total system cost of each alternative.
Okay, thank you. What I take from your response is that EKPC takes all costs into consideration and that overall the company's IRP modeling is fairly comprehensive. Is that safe to say?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Can you discuss how the modeling resource that the company uses take into consideration the intermittent nature of renewable power resources?
Yes, sir. So the model, it's an hourly based model. So each hour of the 15 years is modeled explicitly. And the renewable resources, whether it be wind or solar, have a generation profile based on their history or the expected output based on historical weather patterns. So in the summer, the solar would obviously be higher in the afternoons, and then not available in the evenings, and that is modeled explicitly each hour of where it would be available.
Okay. Let's see. And then if in your modeling it appears that a backup resource, well, let me backtrack. Say that if a renewable resource is beginning to look favorable, but it may also require a resource due to intermittency. What kind of backup resources are examined? Is there like a separate analysis then, or is it all part of the same thing? Or how does that work?
The way we would currently look at it for a long-term view is we would assume the expected capacity would be available that we could utilize in against our capacity value, and if that's not adequate, we would be purchasing additional capacity to shore that unit, that resource up if needed. We don't currently specifically look at a battery backup, if you will, or another resource. As we get into utilizing these resources and putting them on the system, we could see getting to the level of looking at backing them up with specific other generation resources, battery resources, or securing them physically. But currently, we just do it through pricing modeling.
Okay. And so then I take it that the company would also go through a least cost analysis for the backup resource in a situation like that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And when it, is there any way to examine through the IRP process the, for lack of a better term, the interplay between a primary renewable source and a secondary backup source? Like, for example, how frequently it might be needed, things of that nature.
I would say there is a way to do that. It's not something that that we have done at this point in time.
Okay. Okay, I understand. Then if you could turn to your response to AG 2-7 and just let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, great. And thanks, the staff has it up on our screen too. So the question asks, explain when the next survey of the member systems residential customers will be taken. Did the company provide any graphs indicating the impact of energy efficiency standards and appliances anywhere in the application that you're aware of?
Larry, are you
I would
talking
have
about
to
the?
look.
I was going to say, are you talking about the application or the survey?
I guess both. If it's in the application, I think I'd like to know where it is, and if not, maybe if we could get the results of the survey. Although I understand that may not be ready yet.
There is the technical appendix, volume 1, the load forecast has appliance data in it. As far as appliance efficiencies, that is not part of the end-use survey. So there's not any data in the end-use survey that would, any graphs that would address that.
Okay. And obviously your response to these questions was almost 3 months ago, or maybe 2 months ago. But is there any progress report on that most recent survey? You said that they would be expected to come out by the fall. Do you have any update on that?
Yes, we have just recently completed it, and the report has gone to management at this time.
Okay. So David, if I asked in a post-hearing data request for that to be provided, do you expect that there's a time when that would be ready to be provided?
I mean, I think once it's been completed and reviewed and finalized, it would, potentially be subject to disclosure at that point, but probably not before then.
Okay. I think I will ask in a post-hearing data request then for that to be provided when ready. And then they have to go to post-case files and post-case files too. Let's see. And then Ms. Tucker, if you could turn to the next question on AG 2-8, just let me know when there.
And I apologize for my picture has gone black, but I needed to hook back into my internet to get better sound. Okay, 2-8?
Sure. Yeah, 2-8, uh-huh.
Okay.
And so your response states that the economic data was received from the IHS Global Insight in the fall of 2017, and that was, obviously 3 years ago. Since that time, gone through a lot, and all kinds of things have changed, and especially this year, 2020 has changed all kinds of economic and financial forecasts. And first, I'm just wondering, can you explain why that data is so old and why the company cannot get anything more current?
When the load forecast was developed in 2018, the fall of 2017 was the most, we start early in the year developing our data. So that was the most current information available, excuse me, at the time that load forecast was developed. And as you state, we are in another year. We are in the process of updating the load forecast. We started with Global Insight data from fall of 2019, actually for this year. Obviously, with all the changes that have occurred and taken place, we have delayed the development of the load forecast to get an updated set of data from IHS, and we've just recently received that. So this year's load forecast will, be updated with data that came out the summer of 2020. But for the filing in 2019, as we said before, it was filed in April of 2019. The analysis starts taking place in summer of the year before, summer to fall. And so, in 2018, when you developing this analysis, that data was not stale and not old at the time that this was developed.
Okay, I understand. Okay, thank you.
This is David Cruz. Can you give some color around, the load forecast is the first thing that has to happen to do the integrated resource plan. are one of the first things, because it drives all the other, or it drives much of the other modeling. So can you speak to, from a process to explain why, we step through and why this is, the financial data and the load forecasting?
Okay. Thank you for that. My next question is about AG 2-13, and I believe the respondents here were Craig Johnson and Mark Brewer. And so if you guys could just turn to that and let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Craig Johnson.
Thank you very much. In subpart C here, we asked about the beneficial reuse of fly ash from spur rock 1 and 2 as a cement supplement to the ready mix industry. Could you read that response to that subpart C into the record?
Subpart C. Craig Johnson responding. Response 13C reads as follows. Due to safety issues associated with bulk hauling trucks traveling to and from Ekpc's rock station silos, which are located in the middle of major construction activities associated with the CCR ELG project, ash sales were placed on hold until the project is completed next year. In addition, there is currently no fly ash from rock units 1 and 2 silos available for sale due to Ekpc's need for this ash as a cover material for its latest spur rock landfill cell construction. Fly ash from spur rock units 1 and 2 will be integral in the disposal of wastewater produced by the new ELG equipment now being installed. The wastewater from the new ELG wastewater treatment system will be used to wet the fly ash prior to landfill. It is estimated that all of the fly ash Ekpc produces will be needed in the process of the wastewater disposal. Ekpc will market any fly ash from rock units 1 and 2 that is available from the completion of the wastewater treatment system. CCR materials from units 3 and 4 are not suitable as a cement supplement or as an anti-skid material. The gypsum byproduct from the operation of units 1 and 2 flue gas scrubbers is not suitable for use in production of wallboard. The 2 units at Cooper Station are typically on reserve standby and do not produce enough ash for sales. As a result, beneficial ash users have not shown any interest due to the need for reliable, consistent source of ash.
Okay, thank you. So the question I have is, once the ELG facility there at Spur Rock has been constructed, does the company expect to start the sale of fly ash to the ready mix industry at any given point in time, or will the internal need for the fly ash from Spur Rock 1 and 2 remain indefinitely?
Once the wastewater treatment system goes online, which is expected to be spring of 2021, we will, the byproduct from the wastewater treatment will be used to wet the fly ash from 1 and 2. That will make it unsuitable for the cement industry. And that ash will be landfilled.
Okay. Have you ever been approached by any other company regarding the use of fly ash?
Yes, varying companies have contacted us and showed a limited amount of use or limited inquiries for the use of fly ash. Units 3 and 4 make an ash that has a high lime content, and we have been this ash into the industries that want to use that as a drying agent, but we haven't seen any sales like that here in the last few years.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the only ash that we think going forward has any marketability at all is probably the bottom ash, and that could be used in some type of industry, but that's a very limited amount.
Okay. All right. Next question is about the response to AD2-. I believe the respondents here were Julia and Mary Jane Warner. So if you could just let me know when you're there.
I have it.
Okay, thank you. And this question is about the merchant solar facilities that obviously are going up almost every day. We get new applications in. Does Ekpc's IRP process take these facilities into consideration as a potential least cost resource?
Julia Tucker responding. Not the specific projects. We do a price. We do an average price of projects we've seen. If we determine the need for a project and the solar project is viable, we would expect them to participate in an RFP, and if they are the least cost alternative, then they will come out of the RFP as such.
Okay. So if an RFP is issued and they decide to respond, then their bid or whatever it's referred to as basically is treated the same as everybody else's bid. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
how many questions do you have?
I have just a couple more, but one of them is going to be, a couple of them actually are going to be, could involve a few more minutes. Would you like to take a break?
I believe we would all like to take a break. I'm being I'm being reminded that we've been sitting here for a while. Maybe a 10-minute break until 10 of.
Okay, sure, that's fine.
And then we'll get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Ready?
Yes, ma'am.
You may continue to ask, Mr. Cook.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. My next question is addressed to Mike McNally. Mr. McNally, you had a response to the second set of data requests, item number 2. So I'm wondering if you could turn to that and just let me know when you're there.
The second set,
Yes.
AG2.
No, it's the Commission's second set.
Okay. I think I see that. And let me just make sure I got it. There it is on the screen. I can see it there. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So, and I just wanted to ask you if you could read a portion of your response into the record. It's actually a pretty long response. I don't want to have to go over it all, but I did want to start on page 2 at the paragraph that starts, in order to ensure adequate funds. And if you see that, if you could just start there.
I don't have it in front of me. I'll wait for it to come up on the shared screen if that's okay. While I try to bring it up.
You scroll.
On to the next page.
Yeah, it's on page 2. Yeah.
Okay, is that it with the large projects at that point or farther down?
It's further down. It starts up, in order to ensure adequate funds.
I see it.
There we go. Yeah, and if you could just read that through the end of the response, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll rely on scrolling help from the PSC folks. And again, this is Mike McNally, Chief Financial Officer. It says, the response says, in order to ensure adequate funds to get through the start of the crisis, in early March, EKPC drew $100 million from the credit facility. Approximately $20 million was already planned to meet normal operating needs, and reaffirmed availability of funding for the remaining $325 million on the credit facility in case the crisis worsened or continued for an extended period. EKPC also paid its RUS and FFB quarterly principal and interest payment at March 31st out of the cushion of credit account, rather than from operating funds as originally intended. This ensures operating funds remain available, but EKPC has forgone some of the savings anticipated in using the cushion balance to prepay RUS FFB debt later this year, and the 5% interest earned in the cushion on those funds. EKPC will evaluate doing this again at the June 30th payment date. We continue on. We are in frequent communication with our owner members regarding the impacts of COVID-19 on their financial condition. EKPC and its owner members support the order not to shut off delinquent members nor to charge late fees. However, these actions are having significant impact on EKPC's owner members' finances. Owner members reported as of the end of March that approximately 10% to 25% of prepaid accounts had negative balances totaling nearly $200,000, and that both the balances and percentages of accounts were increasing. Because prepaid accounts typically do not have significant financial resources, it is likely that there will be substantial charge-offs arising from those balances when the crisis abates and normal collection efforts resume. In addition, deferral of late fees is expected to total $700,000 per month. You would scroll, please. If these are never billed and recovered, there will be a permanent loss and margins and financial metrics will be impacted. Arrearages of regular accounts also are increasing, although the impacts won't be fully known until all 16 owner members have completed full billing cycles since the date of the Commission's and Governor's orders became effective. So far, arrearages are running from about 4% to nearly 20% of accounts, with total dollars in arrears exceeding $4 million and expected to climb quickly. As with prepay accounts, owner members expect some of these amounts will never be collected, as many customers simply won't be able to catch up. March megawatt-hour billing declined due to COVID-19 as a result of business closures. Work at home has increased residential load somewhat, and the load curve is slightly flatter. EKPC estimates that megawatt-hour sales have declined approximately 10% in March, but will be higher in April as a result of COVID-19. It is too early to project the duration of the suppressed sales or how much recovery and over what time frame we would anticipate. Clearly, with some businesses unlikely to restart or recover, we should expect some of the sales loss will be permanent. Of course, this sales loss originates with EKPC's owner members, who are also losing their distribution revenues. In parentheses, EKPC doesn't see that impact in our own billing, in parentheses. The fuel adjustment clause is an area of good news, as very low PJM market electricity prices are being passed through to owner members and their members. Together, these impacts create significant financial hardship for EKPC's owner members who are drawing on their own resources, parentheses, cash, lines of credit, etc., close parens, to ensure their own continuing operations. In support of them, EKPC has delayed the payment due date for the power bill due in April to May 1st, and will consider similar or more aggressive action with future power bills until the crisis has passed. EKPC has pledged to work with any owner member needing financial assistance as well. However, we do not expect any requests until closer to the May 1st power bill due date. EKPC remains confident that with its financial strength and liquidity, it can ensure that EKPC and its owner members continue safe, reliable operations. However, once the crisis abates, we will need to assess the combined impacts and take steps to recover our financial strength and liquidity, especially if a second round of COVID-19 appears likely. For some other members, this may take the form of emergency rate relief.
Okay, thank you very much for reading that. So it's been a couple months since your response here, and I'm just wondering, in general, do you have any kind of updates that could shed more light on this situation? Anything at all?
Yeah, I'll do what I can and just follow up as appropriate, I guess. First, of course, this was written back as the crisis was really just getting underway. We did see continued declines in April and May and some recovery since, and I'd say by the end of July, it appears that our load is fairly close to normal, just a little bit off on a weather normalized basis. Obviously, there's differences from one customer to another, one class to another, one member system to another. So I don't want to suggest that everybody's come back to a normal level. And that's at the East Kentucky level. Member systems data we collected for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then KEC took that over so they could collect data statewide. And so we haven't pursued the specific data that's cited in this response on an ongoing basis. KEC might have that, but I haven't seen it myself. My sense is that the collection issues have continued. Prepaid accounts continue to be highly negative balances, and of course the negative balance on a prepaid account is a real problem. And then the normal accounts have slipped into arrearages in many cases, and that's a potential problem. Disconnect fees, reconnect fees, and similar types of fees continue to not be charged. In an effort to help our members, I mentioned in the response that I just read that we extended the power bill due date to May 1st from April 21st for that bill. The May bill we extended, I believe it was to June 5th, and then the subsequent bills we've set at the end of the month. So rather than the 21st of the month, we're asking our members to pay us by the end of each month, giving them effectively 9 or 10 days depending upon the month. And we intend to continue that practice until the PSC lifts its order and they can begin normal collection activities. So it may actually go another month after the order is lifted. We'll see what the member system needs are. With those dates, our member systems are all paying us on time. So from our standpoint, we're doing all right financially. And I'll just go back to that response and think, we were looking very early on at a potentially very deep loss of revenue, and as a result, loss of cash flow. We were very concerned about liquidity, and we were really concerned about the banking world and whether we were going to be entering a 2008 type of crisis. So most of our actions in March were highly defensive to make sure we had cash availability on our credit facility and other liquidity. And as we saw the crisis begin to ease and the Fed's actions take the pressure off of the banks, we returned that extra money that we borrowed. We've gone back to normal banking and I'll say financially normal operations. The June cushion of credit payment was made, the June RUSFFB payment was made out of cash flow and not from the cushion of credit, so we resumed our normal practice there as well. We did extend the date that we intend to repay or prepay RUS loans and FFB loans. That had originally been early August, and with RUS's consent, we moved that now to early September. We did that partly in hope that we would see RUS refinancing legislation enacted, and we've received word recently that that's highly unlikely, so we'll continue with the September date as it is. I'm happy to try and expand on any of that, Larry, or answer additional questions.
Sure. So one thing that comes to mind right away is, if I understand what you said, you understood that it's going to be highly unlikely that Congress will allow the RUS to do refinancings. Is that correct?
That's our understanding. There's been a large nationwide push to allow that refinancing, and there's legislation drafted, but we're told by congressional leaders that it's unlikely to be attached to the stimulus bill that, as everybody knows, is somewhat endowed by itself. So at this point, it seems that it's unlikely we'd see anything.
Okay. And then another question, was Ekpc able to obtain, I don't know if you call it PPP loans, or I think there was also a separate program through the Federal Reserve, and I don't know if it had to be at a certain level or what.
Let me talk about both of those. I think the second one you're referring to is the Main Street Lending Program. And we are eligible for the Main Street Lending Program, but it provides no benefit as the rates and terms of the Main Street lending are more costly than what we currently have in place and available to us. So we did not take advantage of that. We did apply for and receive PPP money. We applied for the full 10 million. That was the limit. We received that money, and we had conflicting information several times from our congressman and from the senior senator in the state, as well as others, and ultimately decided, based on their guidance and others, that we probably shouldn't be considered eligible, and we returned that money in the same month that we received it, which is probably why we weren't on any of the lists. Later, the Treasury issued new guidance that suggested we were probably eligible by the terms of the PPP, but not eligible by the need qualification, if you will. In other words, we didn't have a substantial need because we had adequate banking and other liquidity resources available to us. So I think we made the right decision to return those funds.
Mr. Cook? Everybody froze.
Uh-oh. Was my response audible?
Yes,
Yes.
I could hear you.
Looks like maybe just Larry froze. Mr. Cook froze. Sorry. Being too familiar.
Hello?
There you are.
There you are.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think we heard Mr. McNally's explanation. Just trying to get us back to we recognize that this being a 2019 IRP by definition is prepared in 2018 and based on 2017 data and is a bit stale. So just trying to focus us back to the 2019 IRP discussions.
Right. And I'm looking at Mr. McNally's responses here to data requests. Let's see. So at the top of page 3 of your response there, you stated that while the company and owner members support the Commission's order to not shut off delinquent accounts and to not charge late payment fees, nonetheless, those new requirements are having a significant impact on the owner members' finances. So is there any kind of further update to that?
Mr. Cook, no, I really don't have data to provide a further update. I'd just say that the conditions have not changed, and so it would be reasonable to expect that the amounts are continuing to accumulate. But we have not been tracking that. As I mentioned, KEC has taken over tracking that information.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. The next question is for Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, could you turn to your response in the Commission's second set of data requests, item number 3. Just let me know when you're there.
I can see it on the screen.
Okay, thank you. And so you were asked here to explain how PJM's minimum offer price rule, or the MOPR, will affect Ekpc's participation in PJM. Since the time of the question and your response, have there been any other developments in PJM or at FERC that might affect the company's decision on whether to continue participating in PJM?
David Cruz responded, and Larry, as I understand the question, has anything happened since I responded here that would have changed my response?
Yes.
You know, the FERC has denied all the appeals to the FERC order on the MOPR. At this point, we're appealing the FERC order in court now, but you know, that's going to take some time to play out. So I don't think anything's really changed in this respect.
Okay, all right. And then at the third page of your response to this question, you state that whether any new resource would clear in the RPM market would be dependent upon the MOPR floor level applicable to the fuel type of the generator or an offer level determined through a PJM approved unit-specific offer exemption. Can you explain what you mean there? Further down, you mentioned the possibility that this could result in the possibility of Ekpc having to pay twice for capacity. Can you explain what you mean by the possibility of having to pay twice?
Sure. So the minimum offer price rule, or the MOPR, you know, our biggest issue is self-supply. If the minimum offer price rule holds up, there are no immediate negative effects for East Kentucky because all of our current generation is grandfathered under the rules. So we will be able to bid our generation into the BRA just as we have all along. For those of us that are not as, that don't follow FERC as closely as we do, the minimum offer price rule kind of came in effect. It started back in 2016. Alpine made a complaint, and because I think of what was happening in Maryland at the time, where Maryland was subsidizing resources, initially I had a lot of fear that this was going to be the outcome, and so PJM filed this is where the jump ball came into effect, where PJM filed two proposals to deal with the minimum offer price rule, and FERC didn't choose either one of those and came up with their own guidance. And our issue is that we got swept into the subsidized bucket of generation, and we disagree with that, and that's why we're appealing it. East Kentucky brings both a comparable amount of load and generation into the market, and we think as a result of us bringing both load and generation in essentially equal quantities that we're not the ones causing harm to the market with subsidized resources, and that's our harm. With regard to how it hurts us in the future, since we've been cast in a subsidized resource, or any resource that we would develop would be subsidized, we would be subject to the minimum offer price rule, which means we would have to bid at a minimum of net cone, and at net cone we will likely not clear the market. Our resource would not clear the market. So we would be in a situation where we needed to develop a resource to give us hedge our price risk in the market for energy and to fulfill our potential capacity obligation, but our resource would not clear because we would have to bid it in higher than the clear, what we would expect it to clear. So we wouldn't get an offsetting revenue from the BRA to offset the purchase that we would have to make from as a load for our load obligation. Now, whether or not this would drive us to withdraw from the market, we could move to the FRR market and see similar results there, but we think the same arguments will soon be made about the FRR market that are being made about the BRA. So we think it's important to try to exert ourselves on the policy making currently. Larry, does that answer the question?
I think so, yes. Thank you very much for that. And then also there was something that I believe PJM, correct me, Mr. Cruz, I think that they're considering something to do with carbon pricing. Is that correct?
Okay, so, yes, there's a team, Mr. Cook, there's a team studying carbon price currently. I'm getting a lot of background noise. I don't know if anybody else is, but there is a team in PJM studying carbon price. But the scope of that currently is how to accommodate states that want to enforce carbon pricing on the seams issues between states that want to have a carbon price and states that don't want to have a carbon price. How do you align the market, or what are the market rules such that can happen? Today, it's not a team studying should carbon be placed across the entire PJM market. Now, I'm not going to say that there aren't people that think that that should be done, but that's not the scope of the team today.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So I take it that that is an area of potential concern for the company, correct?
Yes, it is. In fact, we are following and participating on that team. We will exert ourselves as much as we can to have a favorable outcome in that, but I don't know that I can predict the outcome of that.
I understand. Thank you very much, sir. The next question I have is a panel question. It's about the comments filed by the Southern Renewable Energy Association on June 8th in this docket, where it expressed an opinion that EKPC's assumptions regarding renewable energy costs were significantly higher than current market offerings. Can you explain what measures EKPC employs to be certain that its assumptions regarding energy from any generation type are as accurate as possible?
I see Julie coming for this one.
Julie Tucker responding. The information for the generation types came from well-founded organizations. They're from the traditional data came from EIA. The renewable information came from the National Renewable Energies Labs, NREL. Those are the two best resources we felt like for reliable data.
Okay, and then those comments filed by the SREA, they also stated that EKPC's renewable energy cost assumptions are dated from 2016. First of all, is that true? And then, if so, what will the company do to ensure that it has the most up-to-date data?
The data listed on NREL stated it was in 2016 dollars, and so that's why it's listed that way. It's obviously then we utilize the current financial information to move that up to current dollars. We use this information to screen, basically to determine if any of these resources make sense or look like they're economic for the system. If one of the resources shows up that we have a need, and two, that it looks to be a good resource, we would then issue an RFP and look for all projects that meet that need. That's when we'll go into much more detail on the economics and on the pricing. So if our pricing is off, it would show up at that time when you get the RFP. But we are regulated, as you well know, and we still are under the mandate to define a need before adding any new generation. And so this process was to develop if there was a need and what resources would meet that need.
Okay, thank you. And then the same comments also recommended that the NREL annual technology baseline should be used for all renewable energy resource cost and performance assumptions. Do you believe that that would be useful in the company's next IRP?
We'll certainly look at it.
Okay, thank you. Next question is a general panel question. We know that a lot of renewable energy resource types are moving lower in price, but some types of renewables, thinking in particular about solar, can affect the distribution grid and perhaps drive new costs at that level as well. So when EKPC considers new supply-side resources, traditionally it does so based on its corporate structure and mission of being a G&T, generation transmission. But now that we're in a sort of a new era here, that really it's many years have passed since the original IRP regulations were written, and a lot of things are changing. And so one of the things we know is that some of these renewables drive, cause cost drivers at the distribution level, but you guys don't model that. And I understand why, because you're a G&T. But I'm wondering, shouldn't you? In order to get to a least cost resource evaluation, if your member owners have to spend millions of dollars to upgrade their distribution grid, isn't that something that needs to go into the equation? I'll just toss that out.
Yes, it needs to go into the equation. I would think, and Darren can correct me here if I'm wrong, but when the project puts in its request to connect to the transmission system or the distribution system, the costs that are the incremental cost caused by that project should be evaluated at that point in time. So the project should be responsible for those incremental costs if it's burdening the system to put it on. So assuming that the project gets the correct allocated cost, then you would be paying, they would keep the distribution whole, and whoever buys the energy from the project would be paying those costs.
Yeah, hello. So, go ahead.
This is Aaron Adams.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and expand a little bit on what Julie said. You know, I think that's true. You know, we've seen many projects request connection to the East Kentucky system, but those are all at the transmission level. So, you know, we're identifying impacts on the transmission grid due to those projects. It would be a different process for a project that wanted to connect at the distribution level. To date, we haven't seen any projects of any substantial size want to connect at the distribution level. And you know, honestly, there's going to be practical restrictions on what the output could be of a project that wants to connect to the distribution level for the very reasons that you're referring to, Mr. Cook, that the cost to try to connect at that level would be very high for a large-scale project.
Okay.
David Cruz responded, Mr. Cook, there's been quite a few changes in the purple law. East Kentucky applied for an exemption, or our purple obligation has been moved from 80 megawatts down to 20 as far as what we are required to purchase under PURPA because we're in PJM. PURPA just recently changed the minimum requirement for utilities in the organized market from 20 down to 5 megawatts. And so so that is being appealed at FERC right now, but that could drive a change in our cogen tariff at some point in the future. But a 20 megawatt system doesn't, that would be difficult to accommodate frequently on most distribution lines. It would be probably be difficult. And I agree with Darren, we have not seen a great deal of, we've not seen a great deal of distribution system solar farms coming up this year.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I believe that's all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. Just a few. First, I guess really just an observation. It's been 10 years since East Kentucky's had a base rate case, which is quite a record, so everybody on this panel must be doing something right. That's my observation. When you evaluate purchase power versus self-supply options, does the purchase power option eliminate the MOPR self-supply risk?
David Cruz responded. Mr. Kurtz, I think that is, it depends right now, but if capacity were to come with the purchase power, it potentially could be subject to the MOPR. And now, if we got a fixed energy cost, because one of the things we would be trying to do is protect ourselves from pricing in the marketplace, that might give us, the vehicle that we're looking for without having a problem with the MOPR. Because in the market, we get, so we have to purchase from a load standpoint, we have to purchase capacity in the capacity market, but that capacity purchase does not give us any fixed price protection in the market. What it allows us to do is to purchase energy as necessary for our load in the marketplace, but we have to pay whatever price there is. So, I think the short answer to your question right now is yes, that the PPA could potentially be still subject to the MOPR going forward.
Just as a general matter, last 6 months, last year, what you project going forward, what percent of East Kentucky's energy comes from the PJM market versus self-generation for the energy?
Julie Tucker responding. If you look at the FAC filings that we have, roughly, and it's just rough, but it's about 50% market and 50% from self-generation.
And I think Mr. McNally mentioned that the benefits of that flow through the FAC, is that correct? So that's a good thing.
That's correct.
Do you expect market energy prices to remain fairly low, below your dispatch cost in the near future, foreseeable future?
David Cruz responding. The forward price curve for gas over the transparent part of the market is about $2.50 for the next 4 to 5 years, which is a little higher than it is today, but that is very favorable price forecast for our members. So we believe that we'll see similar pricing to what we have today, maybe not quite as low as we've seen in 2020 because of the impacts of COVID, but we think we will see very favorable opportunity to purchase from the market at lower than some of our generation costs.
This CO2 scenes working group that you referred to, David, I'll just ask you, is the risk that the energy you purchase would be higher, or that the energy you're able to sell into the market would sort of have a penalty attached to it? What's the risk associated with that CO2 working group? It's work in progress. I mean, it could be anything could come out of it, but what is the risk you're generally considering?
Well, our concern, of course, would be that there would be an effort to apply a CO2 tax to the generation, to conventional generation, which would drive the cost of energy up across the entire market. So that's a concern. The other concern is, is that we have to be careful about how we set up the seams between states that participate in a CO2 tax and the states that don't apply a CO2 tax, because if one state is causing all the generation within their boundary to elevate the cost of their generation, that takes a lower cost resource away from us to purchase, and it could cause us to have to run our generation more as a result. So there's a lot of things that can happen as a result of a CO2 tax, but mostly the one thing that is somewhat predictable about it is that you're going to layer on another expense to generation that's going to raise the price of energy.
Okay. One last question. When you consider a solar, I'll just use solar, a solar build, self-build, or a self-build, do you have, for purposes of RPM, PJM capacity, do you have to build 2 megawatts of solar to basically get 1 megawatt of capacity value for PJM purposes because of the equivalent forced outage modification?
First of all new solar will be subject to the minimum offer price rule. Depending on depending on who builds it, it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But the last time I looked at this, I believe that the capacity credit that you got was about a third of the BRA. If you'd like, I can answer that question in more detail on the post-data request.
Well, you don't need to do that. So you would need to build, if it was a third, you would need to build 3 megawatts to get 1 megawatt of capacity value.
Yes, in the marketplace.
I actually think it's closer to 2 to 1 at this point, but I may be wrong. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Commissioner Matthews, those are all my questions.
Mr. Sanford, do you have any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Ms. Frederick?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Cook?
Nothing further.
Do we need to talk about timing for post-hearing data requests? I think Mr. Cook is the only one who has a post-hearing data request. And you will get those in writing, correct?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure I can get those in within a couple of days. That's okay.
Okay. How long do you think you would need to respond to those?
If we could have 10 days to 2 weeks.
10 days?
It's just one, right? Is that right, Larry?
I think it was 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
I put 2 hash marks.
10 days should be sufficient, Your Honor.
Okay. So if you could get them by the 22nd. Does that mean, no, 22nd is a Saturday, sorry. 21st would be tomorrow, 5 o'clock. Would that be September 11th? Is that too long?
No, that would be fine. If we could probably do it by September 4th.
September 4th would be even better. Anything else? I think that was it. Appreciate your humoring us on this first IRP hearing that we've had since most of the staff joined the commission. I believe Dr. Rognus and I are the only ones that are long enough in the tooth to have been involved in the last IRP hearings. Perhaps Mr. Scott. Appreciate it, and with that, I think we're finished. We're going off the record in 2019-00069.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.